in order. This is the Construction Advisory and Appeals Board, March 6, 2014. Before we get started, I'd like to go through the few of us that are here and go ahead and reintroduce ourselves since we meet somewhat infrequently. I guess we'll start with Ann.
My name is Ann Hager, and I'm a new member to the board.
I'm Kyle Stevens, Hayes Engineering.
Robert Holder's IC and Heating.
Dennis Hedrick Holmes. I'm a home builder here locally.
First item on the agenda is consider approval of minutes from the March 27th, 2012 meeting. Do we have? I didn't get a copy of the minutes.
Should be a copy on the second page in your folder, that handout that I gave you guys. I think there should be a second page in there.
Okay. Okay, can I get a motion to accept the minutes as written?
I'll make a motion.
All right. Got a motion by Mr. Holder, a second by Ms. Hugman. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, motion passes. All right, next item on the agenda is going to be the discussion of a proposal for the City of Longview to adopt the 2012 version of the published ICC codes and the 2011 version of the NEC code. I'm going to turn it over to Skip at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, board members. I'd like to thank all of you for coming here today, and thank all the members, public and city, who were in attendance. This is actually a non-decision-making, informational-only call for the board to talk about adopting a new code version, the ICC code version, as well as the National Electrical Code. Let me give you a little bit of background about what's happening with this whole code adoption process. About late October, early November, we were visited by a representative of the ISO. ISO is a rating organization that assigns values to cities, or rating factor to cities, that determines their insurance ratings. ISO has several components. They look at a lot of different stuff in the city for its overall ratings. Fire department, public infrastructure, water-wise, building codes, and the department that actually looks at the building inspection department is a building code effectiveness grading schedule. They visited us, and one of their chief concerns, or one of the prime factors that's going to affect our current ratings, is the fact that our building codes are very far out of date. The ISO, the part that normally visits the cities for the building department, is supposed to visit the city. They have a schedule to visit the city every 5 years and do an audit on the building department. It had been approximately 16 years since we've had a visit from this department of ISO. So for whatever reason, the newest appointee, or the newest district person in charge of the ISO for our area around here, came and visited us last November, and they sent us a letter of recommendation. And like I say, the primary factor to maintaining the rating that we have now, which the building inspection department's rating is a 3 for commercial and a 3 for residential. And it's a pretty good rating. That contributes to the overall city's rating. The fire department, which plays one of the biggest factors in developing the ratings for the city, is also dependent upon the version of the building code and fire codes that the city has adopted. So our ratings, the building department rating, contributes to the fire department's ratings in so much as the code version that we have adopted. So we've started a process. We sent a letter. The ISO gave us an option. There was a letter that was sent back to the city that had 4 or 5 different options, everything from, we are going to develop a plan to meet your criteria so that we maintain our current ratings, all the way to, we don't really care what happens with ISO and we're not going to do anything. Well, obviously, we responded to that letter and told them that we were going to develop a plan over the next year to satisfy the criteria that they found lacking in the building inspection department to maintain the ratings that we have right now. So we started the process. Chief among them is adoption of the new version of the building codes. The most current version is the 2012 ICC. The 2015, it won't be published until late the end of next year. I have not seen anything on it, so I don't have a clue as to what it's going to be like. Obviously, there are some changes when we jump 4 code cycles from the 2003 that we were currently under to the 2012. Part of our plan to implement this code change was to hold a series of public meetings that started off with presentation to council, which we did last Thursday night, to inform council of our plans to achieve the criteria to maintain the ratings that we have for the ISO right now. The plan also calls for several public meetings during the course of the year, beginning with this meeting right here, which is a presentation or discussion with the Construction Advisory and Appeals Board concerning this code update change. Ultimately, the Construction Advisory and Appeals Board makes recommendation to council that they are in favor or not in favor of adopting a newer version of the building code. And so here we are beginning this discussion with the changes, and the handout that I gave you, or that you should have received for this meeting, list the significant changes excuse me, of the 2012 code. Now, like the codes are published every 3 years, so there's significant changes between the 3 and the 6, the 6 and the 9, and the 9 and the 12, culminating with, we've put together as much stuff as we can think of, or that has caught our eye, that will be changed from our current code to the 2012 version. The 2011 version of the NEC is the electrical code that we're seeking to adopt. It is the most current of the national electrical codes. 14 won't be published until late October, and I don't see any reason to pursue it since adoption of the 2011 NEC will meet ISO requirements, as well as we don't know much about the 14 NEC. So what I'm going to do basically is open this thing up to discussion. If you want to talk about specific things that we have in the building code that you see in the handouts that I gave you, excuse me, or about the process, we're basically starting discussion right now. So I'm gonna turn the discussion over to the panel, and we're gonna ask for public comment, which is mostly on city employees at this point in time, at the end of the program. Yes, ma'am.
I just have a clarification question. When we're looking at the overall code changes, so what we're saying is that we're looking at the fire code going to 2011. I'm sorry, we're looking at the electrical code going to 2011, and all of the other codes to 2012?
Correct.
Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, all right, thank you.
If you want to, let me just kind of hit on some of the high points that we've noticed and some of the things that we pointed out to council concerning these code changes we have out there. Commercial-wise, we have in the fire and building code, some of the assembly occupancies have been restricted or are more stringent on the occupant load prior to requiring fire suppression systems. These occupancies are noticeably small assembly areas, and that's assemblies being everything from a small church to a small bar, restaurant, any place that people gather for entertainment, worship, religious purposes, which I guess is worship. Currently, our building code says that they give us a square footage of 5,000 square feet or an occupant load of 300 prior to that occupancy requiring a fire suppression system. The square footage stays the same, the occupant load goes down to 100. Now, there is also compensation in those with small mercantile occupancies. They gave them a little leeway prior to requiring the fire suppression system trigger. Upholstered furniture sales, mercantile, retail furniture sales, upholstered, it doesn't matter the size of the actual mercantile or the size of the retail space, requires a fire suppression system. Any upholstered, that's not bare wood furniture, but it says upholstered furniture. One of the things that came out at council the other night was a new code occupancy that is defined as ambulatory care facility. This is a facility that we normally think about as day surgery, where the participants, patients, whatever you want to call them, are temporarily rendered incapable of self-preservation. Basically, they get put out, they go under. They have some type of sedation to facilitate this process. Currently, day surgeries, the majority of the ones that we have are in facilities that have already required a fire suppression system because of the size of the building. They were considered business occupancies under the 2003 and 2006 code. The code writers felt like there are people who are, because they're incapable of self-preservation, that requiring staff or whoever to facilitate getting them out of a facility should something happen while they're under. It was better to go ahead and require a sprinkler system, a fire suppression system, to protect from loss of life and or loss of property, loss of life being most important, rather than ignoring this particular condition. That looks at sedation dentistry, possibly dialysis, day surgeries requiring sedation. Those are the three main things that I can think of. Like I say, most of the facilities that we have that offer these services are also incorporated into a hospital or a large medical building, which fire suppression system's already there. So I think probably sedation dentistry buildings might be the ones that would be most affected with this. Yes, sir, Mr. Holder.
What about nursing homes?
They're required to be sprinkled already.
So that
I mean,
they're
that's,
already
yeah, that's
undercover.
a totally different, a residential occupancy or an institutional occupancy, which even back in the 03 codes is already, that was dealt with a long time ago.
So in the 2012, you're saying that no matter what the size of this sedation or this
Yeah,
ambulatory...
it's the occupancy.
Okay, so it's not business anymore? Is it now medical or is it institutional?
If it has that circumstance that is described in the building code as rendering people incapable of self-preservation.
But what occupancy does it fall under?
Ambulatory care. It's a
Okay.
totally new occupancy type that was, I believe, introduced in the 2012 code. Understand, some of these changes came in the 6 and some came in the 9. This is kind of a cumulative thing that we're trying to discuss now. As a matter of fact, a considerable number of the significant changes that will impact us have already occurred in a previous code change, and the things that we talk about are not necessarily all just happened in the 2012 code. Mm-hmm. Which brings up another consideration or another point to bring out. A lot of the designers, especially big box, out-of-town designers, have already started designing under the latest code version. They tend to say, let's design under the most stringent of circumstances that are out there right now. And then if we get some type of, if there's a different code enforced, then we can modify it. But a lot of our projects that come in from out of town and a lot of our own designers are already looking at the design requirements from the most recently published code version out there. It makes good sense. We have had plans come in over the last couple of years that this has happened, and we've ended up having the designers start pulling parts of the plan that deal with life safety out because it's not part of the code that we enforce right now. And the sprinkler systems and the occupant loads being a couple of the major revisions in probably a cost-saving effort, because it's not something that we have enforced to date that will be enforceable under the 2012 codes. can't remember anything else under the commercial code that we had on the screen. Anybody remember anything from the other night on the commercial end of it that we didn't cover?
What is,
Is
Skip,
that the
what's your
PowerPoint
time
presentation?
frame on this? Like, if we start today, what do you foresee us, with all the public meetings, et cetera, when do you see this happening?
Next Thursday.
Is the public meeting?
No, I'm just kidding. No, we have to go 8 months. I don't know that we have an end time frame for it yet. ISO wants to see a plan that reaches out within a year.
Okay,
So I think a year is the maximum we want to look at. There is no minimum. We have to ensure that this concept or this plan gets advertised to as many people in the community as possible so that they don't get slapped in the face with, oh no, this plan won't work because we just adopted a new building code. And as a design professional, I know you can appreciate that. So there's no deadline, but towards the end of the year, we'd like to be looking at presenting this adoption change to council.
okay. I don't see a problem with that. What, of all the things that you've researched, you have researched this much more than we have, are there any negatives? Or what are the negatives? What are the cons?
Somebody is going to bring this up, and that's the 2012 code requirement for every new residential structure to have a fire sprinkler system in it. Okay? There is
No matter what the size?
no matter what the size.
Okay.
All new residential construction is going to have a fire sprinkler system in it. However, there is a Senate Bill 1410 or a SB 1410, I've got it listed in here somewhere, that was introduced in the occupational code about 2 years ago that says a municipality will not adopt an ordinance, rule, law, code that mandates residential fire suppression systems. I talked with our legal department about, okay, how do we deal with this? There's a conflict between state law and a conflict between the code. And I got the assurance that adopting the code and omitting that requirement out of the residential code and then all references to that required fire suppression systems and to continue using the method that we do right now to determine whether a residential fire suppression system is going to be a requirement or an alternative to building residential construction, that we use the same method that we're doing right now, which is basically a 3,600 square foot trigger on residential construction that requires us to see if there is fire flow available within the guidelines of the Fire Code Appendix B. And that's the method we've been using for the past 6-7 years, and that we, by ordinance, do it the same way we've always been doing that. And nobody seems to feel that this is a problem. So that residential fire suppression system is, like I say, somebody's going to bring it up, and how are we going to deal with that? And that's our plan right now, is to, when we adopt the code by ordinance, keep it just the same as it is right now for residential construction.
Okay, when you see this change in, it seems to me like there's going to be a lot more fire sprinkler systems required in the future, which I don't think is a negative. I think it's a good thing. Is our infrastructure going to handle it?
I don't know that we're going to see a lot more, Ann. We're going to see there are some businesses that have new guidelines that affect this right now. The new construction, historically our new construction has got new infrastructure. There may be instances that we infill or remodel existing buildings for a change of occupancy that may not. And that's not going to change whether we have a new code or we have the old code. That circumstance still arises from time to time in doing that now. So it's not a problem. It's not a new problem that we're going to face in the future.
Okay.
It's a current problem that we're still going to have to deal with, no matter whether we stay on the old code or go to the new code.
It's just something that needs to be discussed.
in a different forum, I will agree, but yes, ma'am, we got the man, well, the old man right there that, but, yeah, I mean, it's not a new problem. The DRCs, we see that more frequently than we'd like to in the meetings that we have with infill and remodels in existing buildings, so. But it's not gonna, I can't see it affecting or stumping new growth.
Skip, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
You said that we would potentially, or we would omit the residential fire sprinkler, fire suppression requirement. Would that affect the ISO rating? If you're adopting the 2012, but you're omitting portions of it, would that affect your ISO rating?
My understanding is that ISO wants to see us adopting the current code version. They didn't give any indication that ordinances, changes were a part of, how they looked at or how they derived their ratings from that amendment type thing. It's just the fact that we have a current version of the building code. And I think they're going to leave that up to the city legal. How are you meeting the intent of the code? Have you changed the way you do things because of a current building code? I think it's just looking at the fact that we are enforcing the most current building code with amendments.
Okay.
What's the average cost to do a house, let's say a 1,500 square foot home for fire suppression? Any idea?
Robert, the fire marshal and I kind of stay away from having that kind of knowledge because
Well, the reason I'm asking is because I know a house that had to have the system put in, it was a little over $10,000 added cost to that house. But, again, I'm just going by what I was told.
$2 to $3 a square foot?
Yeah, it depends. I've heard from $1.25 to $1.50, but typically it's around $2 for residential. Commercial runs between 2 and 3 and 2 and 3 1/4. It depends on the infrastructure and what it takes to get the water to the house.
Actually, that's pretty
also.
cheap safety.
But on a 1,500 square foot home, if they do a build purpose system, which is sanctioned by the health code, plumbers can go get an endorsement. So your house plumbing is incorporated in part of the sprinkler system, so instead of having 2 systems, you're already running your pipes.
Yeah, I understand.
That'll help drive the cost down if that becomes a more popular option for residential
Okay.
sprinklers.
Just curious.
Well, if they go that route, the only problem with that is we can't inspect them by law. So there's another question there. But the new code update is not going to mandate a significant change in the sprinkler requirements for residential construction.
Well, I was just curious on the cost.
Yeah, I did. I had a house about 2,000 square feet about 3 years ago that appeared that it was going to be outside the 600-foot requirement for the house had to be within 600 feet of a fire hydrant, and so I got bids on it. As it turned out, it was just under that, and I didn't have to put it in. But I had 2 bids, and it was about 2,000 square foot house, and one bid was 7,000, one was close about 6,500, and.
Well, the house I was talking about was 3,600 square feet, and it was $10,000 to put it in because of the city code.
This isn't just like any other of the construction industries. That part of it, as the requirement, demand goes up, the price is going to go down. I mean, that's just, it's.
Well, I see 2 options in the system itself. The fact that your insurance should go down. Now, your homeowner's insurance, if you have this suppressor system in there, I'm looking at it both ways, cost, but then I'm looking at the cost of my insurance. Hopefully it'll offset each other.
Yeah, talking dollars and cents, and of course, from the code standpoint of it, we're talking life safety, and it just,
Well, I
no matter
understand that.
how it works
As far as I'm
out.
concerned, the cost is safety is most important besides cost. I mean, I have to look at the safety. I mean, I want my kids or my wife or whoever's at home safe.
And at the same time, part of this process is so that we get it out front with the people in the industry that parts of these code changes, as with any other change, may involve some fiscal impact up front, and, you know, we want no surprises on
Well,
this
they
right
adopt
here.
it, yeah, then technically, the price
Of
should
all
go
the things
down
you've talked about, I can see
eventually.
that
I
being
mean,
the
if
one
you-
that
if
would
you have- if it's
cause the most
required.
uproar.
I'm just guessing.
is
Residential fire
There's
suppression
not that many
system?
people in that business.
for under 3,600,
And,
because you're already
I
requiring it
had
over,
Mutual,
so.
was one, I mean,
Not
one thing.
necessarily required to sprinkle it, but to make sure that that's where we start looking at what's available for fire
If the fire flow
fighting
doesn't-
water is there.
okay.
If it's there, then we don't require the fire suppression system. If it's not, then that isn't an option.
Okay,
You know, another option is reducing the size of the house. I mean,
Right.
you know, at this point in time, we're not mandating any residential fire suppression systems. That's usually the best option to going ahead with that project as it's planned and designed, and, you know, so.
Okay, that's my question.
Anybody else have any more questions?
No, no.
I don't.
Do we want to open it up to staff and public comment?
We do, and I would like to, before I'm done, challenge, you know, this is, now it's out in the open, okay, with the Construction Advisory and Appeals Board and any members of the public that came to this meeting. We are going to be holding a series of public meetings at the Mod Cobb with anybody that wants to come listen to or talk about this thing. It's not, we're not going to try and define or explain or tell you everything that's possibly in the new code. It's an informational process at this point in time only. And yes, there are changes that impact the building community, both money-wise and planning-wise. But if the more feedback we get from the Construction Advisory and Appeal Board, the better. And I've talked to the Builders Association several times over the past year and let them know, hey, you know, change is going to come. If it's not, it'll be driven by something, ISO, or it will be a mutual agreement that it's time for us to, you know, we're a very proactive city. If you compare us against cities of a similar size in our area, we're a lot better off, and we do a lot better job in the area of building safety than anybody else that I can think about. We get ribbed for it from time to time, but in the long run, you know, I'd rather be here than any place else as far as what we do, both from the design, the construction end of it, and the regulatory end of it with our building codes. So it's embarrassing sometimes for me to go off to a building officials meeting or to a national ICC convention and say, well, we're still under the 2003 code, you know. It's like, well, hell, why bother if you're going to have a code cycle that's, you know, if you're going to enforce a code that's so far out of date. And of the 10 fastest growing cities in Texas today, 7 of them have adopted the 2012 code. And the other 3 are on the 2009 code. So it doesn't seem like adopting a new version of the building code is impeding growth. And that's going to be one of the biggest concerns of the public at large and council itself, is that we don't make a move that puts a stumbling block into the growth of our city out here. And I can't see where this would be anything but a good thing. So all the feedback we can get from y'all, the better off.
No, I agree. I think we should be on the 2012. I mean, I have no problem with that. Question for you, just for my edification. ISO, what is low and what is high?
High is
When
a
you talk
1.
High. so
Low
that's-
is at 10. I guess
Okay.
it goes all the way to 10. I don't know how far down it goes.
Okay, so at a 3, we're pretty good.
And yes, we are. The 3 is, our ISO rating for the city is a 2. Okay?
For the
That's
city.
for the city. The building department is a 3. And the building department will probably never get greater than a 3 in our city, for the simple fact that once we get the code challenge out of the way, there are still workload versus manpower you know, things that we have no control over
Right.
that are going to be there that still affect our rating. Not to say that we don't do a really fine job with what we've got, the resources that we've got. But where we're at is good. I mean, that level 3 actually brought the city's rating, or assisted the last time we went through an ISO upgrade to obtaining that level 2 for the overall city rating. So,
Good. Okay, good. That's awesome.
okay, well, thank you very much. And I'm sure there are people out here who may or may want to have something to say. The future meetings will be published. Make sure that everybody, every member of the Construction Advisory and Appeal Board has an invitation, a special invitation when those things happen, as well as our meetings with the Builders Association around town. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I guess at this time, we'll open it up to public comment.
We already have our first meeting scheduled, community meeting. It's April 2nd from 10 a.m. to noon in the Idleman Room at Mod Cobb. Just want to make sure you had that on your calendars. Thank you.
There is something I was going to mention to you guys. Did y'all get that written down? Because that was a brief advertisement. It was for 30 seconds. Yeah. By no means am I proposing this whatsoever, but I think it's good to have information of what the 12 would look like for Longview versus what other cities have done with the 12. And in the areas around the Austin area, the Dallas Metroplex area, not the bigger cities, but some of your suburbs, a lot of them have gone even above the 12 code, and where all commercial buildings above 5,000 get sprinklered. And I thought, wow, that's pretty neat, but I'm not even proposing that. But I'm just saying that there are a lot of cities that are very progressive and growing that have gone a step above what the 12 does and adopted a more stringent to the 12. And that was interesting for me because, you know, one thing, I've lived here my whole life. I make a living living here. I'm a citizen here and I also work here. And I want Longview to keep turning over dirt. And it seems like that's going well so far. And that's why we wanted to survey all the top growth cities in Texas, and that's why I'm glad Skip brought that up. But there are cities that have even come in up to any residential home above 6,000 get sprinkled regardless, even with the state law in effect. So we're really not trying to go above and beyond. We're just trying to get a basic newer code. And Ann and I have discussed this in the past for a larger project in town, but if we ever have to get an audit, the state of Texas is in the 2012. And if I ever need to get them to come in and do a assessment, they would be basing it on the 12, and it does give us a little leeway to follow that. And with these, some of the medical facilities, they're coming in and designing it to a more stringent code than what's adopted because it will affect their payment if they're subsidized. So there's money on the line in both ways, both in development costs, but then operating cost and inspections for some of the facilities. So I think also one other thing I was going to mention, when you talk about insurance ratings, different companies, the state of Texas regulates that, the Texas Department of Insurance, and each company kind of picks and pulls off of ISO ratings, so there's a little bit of variance, but you can talk to your local agents and get their expression. Go in person and get their facial expression, but you might want to talk to some insurance agents and say, what if we weren't a 2 and 3, what would it do for their customer? And I've been doing that personally because I do live here, but that's something we have to consider too, is not losing that savings across. And on the fire side, Chief Stillman has a consultant coming in, Mike Peach, to look at our ISO rating, which comes up next year. And when I talked to Mr. Peach a while back, he said that the fire departments, if we don't get a current code, could take a hit on that portion. Now, we'll know more information as we get our audit, our assessment done before we get our audit, but those are some things on our brain at the fire department. Thank you.
Thanks. Anybody else? All right, Skip, do you have anything else to add, or is it okay if we go ahead and move for adjournment? if there are
I
no other
am.
questions.
I'd like to thank you very much once again for coming here today, and I hope you take this back not only as representatives of the Construction Advisory and Appeals Board, but as ambassadors of the city to where you work and
I have
the
one
things that
question
you
for
do.
you,
Yes, sir.
Skip. Who would argue against this? You keep saying we're going to have these meetings. Who would argue against this? Or be against it? I mean, seriously, I want to know.
I don't think anybody's going to argue against it when they look at the fact that, codes are written because somebody died. Ultimately, that's what changes the things in the code. Oftentimes, the code changes get expensive. We're looking at the electrical code. The 2011 electrical code requires that we put in arc fault circuits throughout the house, as opposed to just the bedrooms that we do right now. There's a cost increase on there. And that arc fault has a very good reason for being. It's hard to prove, but it's the reason it's there. However, there's a cost associated with it that ultimately is going to be passed down to the consumer. So pick a point in that chain who may argue against the fact that we're going to increase the cost a little bit in this particular place without balancing that argument against, hey, this is a life safety issue. That may be where some resistance would come from. Just looking at the dollars and cents as opposed to the big picture with the code adoption.
Okay. I can't see the difference in a few $1,000s or less than that in going through a house on a 1,500 square foot. I mean, I can't see the argument there, but okay.
And that's why I appreciate your view, the big view, every one of you, on this proposal to adopt a new building code, because if you just look at one of those areas that has a dollar sign imposed on it and lose sight, and your argument to the public at large, or your reasoning with your particular trades, your particular professions, is a big picture argument, not focused on a particular dollar amount at some part of the overall.
Well, I understand that. Like in my business, we had to go to the, different duct, but the cost difference wasn't that much. You proposed it, I accepted it, I do it.
And we went through this not too long ago, in particular with your profession, with your trade, with the energy code adoption, when we transitioned to the 2009 energy code. And you see there was some initial resistance to doing that because of the cost. There's no life safety issue involved usually with most of the energy code. It was a overall long-term return that the energy code, forced on us, so to speak. And has it hurt anybody?
No.
No, I don't think so either. So focusing on the big
cost was
picture
not that
is,
much difference.
yeah. Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right, I guess, can we get a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Same sign. All right, we're adjourned.